There's something they don't tell you about modern life. Your mind is no longer yours, hijacked by noise, owned by impulse, shaped by algorithms, flashing lights, and the shallow seduction of likes and instant pleasure. You didn't agree to this. You didn't sign a contract saying your focus, your stillness, your soul could be traded for convenience. But somehow, you woke up one day and it was already gone. What if you could take it back? Not by escaping the world, not by disappearing into a cave, but by returning to something ancient, something brutal, honest, liberating. This isn't just a dopamine detox, it's a war for your mind, and the Stoics are going to show you how to win it. He used to wake up with purpose. Now he wakes up with noise. Notifications ping before the sun rises. His phone lights up before his mind even has a chance to breathe. The silence that once cradled his mornings is gone, replaced by a constant hum of demands, suggestions, distractions. Breakfast doesn't taste like anything anymore. He doesn't chew, he scrolls. He doesn't sit, he swipes. Even his thoughts aren't his own. They're fragmented echoes of what he consumed 5 minutes ago, or what the world told him to care about. The moment he opens his eyes, there's a flood of pings, red notifications, headlines, ads, emails, and the quiet but constant pull of 1,000 invisible strings. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, he scrolls before his feet even touch the floor. Doom scrolling, dopamine chasing. He doesn't call it that, of course. No one does. We just call it catching up. He doesn't know exactly when it started. Maybe it was after the 3rd job change. Maybe after the divorce, or maybe it was always there, slowly creeping in like fog over the ocean. One day he realized he hadn't sat in silence in months. Not real silence. Not the kind where thoughts stretch out and breathe. No. His mind now feels like a subway station at rush hour, jam-packed, impatient, every thought screaming to be first. He started searching for clarity the way most people do, on YouTube. That's where he first heard the phrase, dopamine detox. It sounded cool, almost like a hack, a cleanse for the mind, a way to reset. But it wasn't until he stumbled upon a quote from Marcus Aurelius that something clicked. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That night, he put down the phone and went for a walk. No music, no podcasts, just his footsteps, his breath, and the wind brushing against the trees. The silence was uncomfortable at first, then unfamiliar, then oddly beautiful. For the first time in months, he felt present, not entertained, not distracted, present, and so began his quiet rebellion. Have you ever noticed how loud the world has become, even in silence? That when we finally turn everything off, it feels like our mind is still screaming? That discomfort might just be the invitation we've been waiting for. In ancient Rome, there were no dopamine detoxes, no digital fasts, no smartphones, no TikTok, no Netflix. And yet the Stoics still warned of the same inner chaos we feel today. Epictetus spoke of discipline, not for productivity's sake, but for liberation. Seneca warned of letting the hours slip through our fingers while chasing pleasure. Marcus wrote to himself again and again about the importance of ruling the inner citadel, his mind. They weren't fighting screens. They were fighting the human tendency to scatter, to chase novelty, distraction, and shallow gratification. In many ways, what we call dopamine addiction today, they saw as slavery to externals. You see, a Stoic doesn't run from pleasure. He simply refuses to be ruled by it. And that's the difference. When you grab your phone 97 times a day, it's not because you're curious. It's because you're not free. When you can't sit still without tapping your foot, biting your nails, checking one more thing, it's not because you're busy, it's because your mind is under siege. Modern life didn't invent the problem, it just monetized it. The Stoics would tell you, don't wait for peace to arrive, create it, not by escaping the world, but by mastering how you respond to it. What if every notification was a test of your sovereignty? What if your ability to pause, just pause, was the beginning of your power? He began small, 10 minutes each morning without the phone, then 20, then an entire hour just sitting with a journal and a black cup of coffee. It was hard. The urges came in waves, the hand twitching toward the phone like a phantom limb, the compulsion to just check, the anxiety that maybe he was missing something, but he wasn't missing anything. He was returning to something. He started noticing birds, the way the sky changed colors before sunrise, the way his thoughts no longer felt like static. He didn't become some monk meditating in the forest. He still had bills, deadlines, coworkers, but now there was a center, a still point, a place inside him that was untouched by algorithms. That's the thing about a Stoic-style dopamine detox. It's not about rejecting technology or punishing yourself. It's about reclaiming choice. It's about training the mind to no longer flinch at boredom, to feel hunger without instantly feeding it, to sit in discomfort without numbing it. And slowly, day by day, you begin to remember who you were before the world taught you to escape yourself. Imagine walking through your day without being pulled in 20 directions. Imagine responding instead of reacting. Imagine, for the first time in years, being fully in control of your own mind. Isn't that worth fighting for? He started reading again, not scrolling, reading. Whole pages, whole chapters. The kind of reading that makes you stop and stare at the wall because a sentence just hit you like a freight train. He reread Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This time, it wasn't just ancient wisdom, it was personal. Marcus wrote his meditations during a time of war, disease, betrayal. Yet what he was really battling wasn't outside him, it was the drift of the mind, the seduction of comfort, the pull toward ego and complaint. And he wrote not to impress others, but to remind himself. He was detoxing long before we had the word. Stoicism doesn't tell you to be indifferent, it tells you to be disciplined, to choose the higher path when the lower one is easier, to delay gratification not because pleasure is evil, but because mastery feels better than indulgence. And here's the irony. When you detach from needing pleasure constantly, you actually begin to feel joy again. Real joy. Not the sugar rush kind, the grounded kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sneaks up on you during a walk, or while washing dishes, or while looking at your child's face and realizing you're fully here. How many of your most precious moments have been half-lived because your mind was somewhere else? Wouldn't it be a tragedy to survive life but never truly live it? One of the hardest parts wasn't the silence. It was facing what rose up in the silence. Without the constant drip of stimulation, the shadows came creeping in, regrets, anxieties, old guilt, the dull ache of things left unsaid. It was like draining a river and seeing everything that had been buried beneath the surface. Ugly things, real things. He didn't expect that. He thought detox would make him feel calm, powerful, refreshed. And it did, but not at first. At first, it made him feel raw, vulnerable, naked. There were days when the stillness felt like a cage. The itch to escape was unbearable. But instead of running from it, he remembered what the Stoics taught. What stands in the way becomes the way. He leaned in, he sat with his discomfort and wrote it down. He breathed through the tightness in his chest. He cried once, and for the first time in years, didn't apologize to himself for it. The detox wasn't cleaning his mind, it was uncovering it, and that was where the real freedom began. We often think of clarity as something beautiful, like a crystal lake. But first, the mud has to rise. Could it be that the mess inside you isn't something to avoid, but something to finally understand? One afternoon, he turned off all his devices and drove out past the edge of town. just farmland, fence posts, and the occasional hawk circling in the sky. He parked on a dirt road and sat on the hood of his car. Nothing spectacular happened. He didn't have some grand epiphany, but something subtle did shift. He realized he wasn't bored. He was awake. His senses felt sharper, the breeze cooler, the horizon wider. For once, there was nothing pulling at him, no sound bites to argue with, no reels to react to, no headlines to fear, just space. That's when he understood what the Stoics meant by tranquility, not the absence of noise, but the absence of disturbance. A mind so trained, so anchored, that it remains still even as the world spins wildly around it. A fortress within. In a world designed to fracture your focus, your greatest rebellion is stillness. When was the last time you felt untouched by the storm outside? Back in the city, the noise returned. Of course it did. But now he wasn't drowning in it. He could see it for what it was: bait. Headlines designed to spark outrage. Posts meant to spark envy. Ads constructed to spark craving. It wasn't personal, it was just programming. And suddenly he saw everyone around him, not as enemies, but as prisoners. Men glued to their phones on the subway. Women editing their photos until their faces no longer resembled their own. Teens scrolling past real life in pursuit of pixels. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. He had been one of them. He still was, sometimes. But now he had something they didn't. A practice, a way out. Because Stoicism, at its heart, isn't just philosophy. It's practice, repetition, discipline. It's the daily decision to show up for yourself, not in self-obsession, but in self-command. And Dopamine Detox, when guided by this ancient wisdom, becomes more than a trend. It becomes a return. We spend so much of our lives trying to escape ourselves, but what if the self we're avoiding is the one most worth meeting? He started setting boundaries. No phone in the bedroom, no screens during meals. A full 24-hour digital Sabbath once a week. It felt radical, almost monastic. But it wasn't about rejecting modernity. It was about recovering humanity. He realized how much of his anxiety wasn't caused by problems, but by interruptions. The constant pinging of expectation. The illusion that he must always be reachable, always performing, always tuned in. So he tuned out and tuned into something deeper. When he walked now, he noticed how the light filtered through the leaves. When he showered, he focused on the water, the warmth, the gratitude. When he spoke to someone, he looked them in the eyes. He wasn't perfect. He relapsed sometimes, spent too long on YouTube, scrolled too deep into Instagram, but that didn't define him. His practice defined him. Progress is not perfection. Every time you pause before reacting, you win. Every time you choose presence over distraction, you reclaim a piece of your soul. Are you keeping score in the right game? He wasn't doing this to impress anyone. In fact, no one really noticed. He didn't post about his detox. He didn't announce it to friends. He simply lived it, quietly, stoically. And the rewards weren't loud either. They were subtle. He started sleeping better, thinking clearer, feeling more grounded, less reactive. His mind, once a battlefield, had become a sanctuary. And this is where the real beauty of Stoicism meets modern life. Because in a culture that rewards stimulation, the Stoic detox reminds us to rewire attention. In a system that profits from addiction, the Stoic path offers self-ownership. And in a time when everyone is trying to go viral, the Stoic stands calm, firm, and whole, invisible perhaps, but entirely free. If you truly ruled your mind, what would your life look like? What would change if nothing external could disturb your peace? There's a strange kind of grief that comes with waking up, not the kind that brings tears, but the quiet ache of realizing how long you've been asleep. How many moments you missed while scrolling, How many conversations you half heard, how much life slipped through your fingers because your mind was somewhere else. He felt that grief one evening, sitting across the table from his daughter. She was telling him a story about school, something about a friend and a field trip, but he wasn't really there. His hand was under the table, fingers curled around his phone, mind half checking an email that didn't matter. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at him and he saw it. The flicker of hurt in her eyes, the moment she felt unseen, the moment his distraction became her story. He put the phone away, not just for the night, but for something bigger. That was the moment he understood. This detox wasn't about productivity. It was about presence. Because the people we love don't need our attention sometimes. They need it fully. They need us here, now, whole. That night after she went to bed, he sat in the living room alone. No TV, no podcast, just him and the weight of his own awakening. And in that quiet, he made a vow, not to be perfect, but to be present, to honor the sacred, fleeting gift of awareness. When you leave this world, will they say you were successful or that you were truly there, that you lived fully, deeply awake? What legacy does your presence write today? He began tracking his cravings, not just for dopamine, but for validation, approval, escape. It was startling. How often he checked likes after posting something, how quickly he reached for distraction when emotions got heavy, how deeply his identity had entangled itself with virtual applause. That's when the Stoic voice returned. If you seek tranquility, Marcus Aurelius wrote, do less, not out of laziness, but out of purpose. Do fewer things, but do them with full presence. Stop scattering your soul. He deleted half his apps, turned off all notifications, unfollowed anyone who stirred comparison or contempt. He wasn't angry at them, he just knew he had no space left to rent out to noise. This wasn't digital minimalism, this was inner housekeeping. He began replacing mindless habits with mindful rituals. Where there was once scrolling, now there was breathwork. Where there was once binge watching, now there was evening journaling. Where there was once self-doubt, now there was observation without judgment. He was not purging pleasure. He was pruning distraction so the deeper joys could bloom. What would happen if you no longer reacted automatically but consciously chose your next move? Could that be the beginning of mastery, not over the world, but over yourself? He remembered something a mentor once said, if you don't control your input, you cannot control your outlook. At first, he brushed it off, but after weeks of detoxing his attention, he saw how true it was. When you constantly consume fear, outrage, and gossip, how could your mind not mirror it? When your mornings begin with headlines and your nights end with endless scrolling, how could your soul not feel fragmented? The Stoics understood this long ago, that your inner world becomes a reflection of what you allow in, that guarding your attention is not self-indulgent, it's self-defense. So he created a boundary ritual. No input the first hour of the day, no input the last hour of the night. Mornings became sacred, filled with quiet stretches, handwritten pages, and unhurried coffee. Nights became reflective, filled with stillness, gratitude, and letting go. His mind, once jittery and scattered, now felt like a lake at dawn, still grounded, reflecting only what truly mattered. Quiconque. You become what you behold. What if protecting your attention was the most powerful thing you could do for your peace, your purpose, your power? Not everyone understood his transformation. Some friends mocked him. You're doing a detox for your brain now? What's next? Emotional fasting? Others subtly distanced themselves. He wasn't as instantly responsive anymore. He didn't laugh at the same reels. He wasn't plugged into the same drama. And that was okay, because a Stoic doesn't live to be understood. He lives to be aligned. He wasn't chasing popularity. He was cultivating sovereignty. And with every small choice, he felt it. An inner quiet, like a campfire in a cold world. Something solid, something no one could take away. When you detox from dopamine, you don't become boring. You become rooted. You see through the flashing lights and empty applause. You realize how many people are performing not because they want to, but because they don't know who they are without it. And you, slowly, quietly, remember who you are. One morning, it rained. Not the dramatic kind with thunder and wind, but a soft, steady fall, the kind that slows everything down. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't check the weather app. He just opened the window and listened. That's it. He sat there, letting the rhythm of the rain pull him back into himself. Time lost its edges, thoughts softened. The usual rush to do dissolved into simply being. He had no words for it, but later, reading Seneca, he found them. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. In that moment, he understood. So much of his addiction to noise had been fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of not knowing, fear of being alone with himself. But when he let go of that grasping, something beautiful happened. Peace arrived, not as a reward, but as a return. There are moments that don't announce themselves. They whisper. Will you be quiet enough to hear them? Or will the noise steal them before they reach you? He began noticing patterns in others. In meetings, coworkers tapped their legs, checked phones, half listened. In cafes, couples sat together, but stared down into separate screens. In parks, children played while their parents scrolled. He saw versions of his old self everywhere, present in body, absent in soul. And he didn't judge them. He simply understood them. He'd been that man, distracted but unaware of his own disconnection, hungry for stimulation but starving for stillness. That's when it hit him. Distraction isn't just a habit, it's a culture. We live in a system built on your attention, not just to sell ads, but to shape desire, perception, even identity. The world doesn't just compete for your time, it competes for your soul. And the Stoic, radical in his simplicity, quietly says, no, not this time. He doesn't fight with anger. He doesn't scream back. He simply redirects his gaze toward what he can control, toward his mind, his reactions, his virtues, toward home. In the age of outrage and overstimulation, the calm man is revolutionary. In your quiet attention, there is thunder. In your stillness, there is fire. Do you feel it yet? There was a night he nearly broke. After weeks of detox, old cravings flared up like a fever. A stressful day, an argument with someone close. He wanted to numb, to binge, to scroll into oblivion. His phone was on the table, screen glowing like an open door to escape. But something stopped him. He remembered a single sentence he had written weeks ago in his journal. Let the discomfort teach you. So instead of running, he sat. He let the anxiety rise like a tide, then watched it fall again. He breathed slowly. He reminded himself, like a stoic soldier before battle, that hardship is not the enemy. Habitual surrender is. The battle wasn't against technology or stress or even desire. The battle was against forgetfulness of who he really was. And in that moment, he didn't reach for the phone. He reached for himself. When temptation rises, will you run or will you return to your breath, your clarity, your inner fortress? Each decision carves the shape of who you're becoming. What shape are you taking? The detox didn't make his life perfect, but it made it real. He still had hard days, still got distracted sometimes, still wanted to run, but now he had tools. He had a philosophy. He had a map. He remembered what Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself. And that mastery, slow, imperfect, powerful, was growing inside him day by day. It showed up in how he handled setbacks, how he spoke to his partner, how he listened to his child, how he walked into the world without the frantic need to consume it. It wasn't about dopamine anymore. It was about dignity, and that shift, subtle but seismic, was the fruit of silence, struggle, and the courage to live differently in a world gone mad. Most men drift through life, but a few choose to steer. They don't need applause, they don't need noise, they need only the sound of their own footsteps on the path they chose. Will you be one of them? It wasn't long before people started to notice something different about him. They couldn't name it exactly. He didn't dress differently, didn't talk louder or smile more, but there was a presence now, a kind of weight like a mountain that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't rush to fill silences in conversations anymore. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, his words had a certain gravity to them, not because he rehearsed them, but because they came from somewhere solid, somewhere still. That's what Dopamine Detox had given him, not just clarity, but congruence. His mind, his actions, his values, they began to align. He had become the kind of man you instinctively trust. Not flashy, not performative, but calm, watchful, rooted, like a tree that bends but does not break. And in a world of performative wisdom, his quiet discipline spoke louder than noise ever could. He wasn't preaching Stoicism, he was embodying it. Good. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can offer is his attention. Undivided, anchored, real. When you walk into a room, what enters with you? Distraction or presence? One afternoon, his coworker pulled him aside. "You're different lately," she said. "Less wired, I don't know. You just feel lighter." He nodded and smiled, not because he had an answer, but because she had felt something that words could never fully describe. She didn't know he'd deleted his social media apps. She didn't know he started meditating every morning, or that he read Marcus Aurelius in the quiet between meetings. She didn't know about the journals, the walks, the small moments of choosing breath over impulse. All she knew was that something in him had changed. And that's how transformation works. Not by announcement, but by vibration. Not by shouting about your growth, but by letting it speak through your energy, your timing, your restraint. When a man reclaims his mind, the world around him begins to adjust. You don't need to change everything around you. You need to change the way you relate to it. Because once you master your mind, the world stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a mirror. He realized over time that this wasn't just a detox. It was a return to virtue. Discipline wasn't punishment anymore. It was freedom. Temperance wasn't denial. It was strength. Wisdom wasn't abstract. It was practical, felt in the smallest of choices, like pausing before reacting, like turning the phone face down during dinner, like saying no when your body says yes, but your soul says wait. He started to feel a strange kind of joy, not pleasure, joy. The joy of doing something hard and knowing you're better because of it. The joy of going to bed without regret. The joy of standing in the wind and feeling absolutely no need to check anything. His joy came from sovereignty, and in that sovereignty, he discovered something else: compassion. Because when you're no longer trapped by your own compulsions, you see how deeply others are trapped in theirs. You don't blame them, you understand them, and from that understanding you serve, not as a savior, but as a lighthouse. You become a signal to others, there is another way. What if your calm wasn't just for you? What if your quiet strength helped others remember their own? Every detoxed mind becomes an invitation. Will you be the one who remembers for those who've forgotten? He wasn't perfect. There were days he gave in, days he slipped, nights when the screen pulled him back into its glow like a moth to flame. But now he knew the difference between indulgence and decision. He didn't spiral anymore. He reset. That's what Stoicism taught him, that the goal is not to never fall, but to rise quickly, without self-pity. He would hear the voice of Epictetus in his ear. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He started measuring his success not by streaks or stats, but by recovery time. How quickly could he notice he'd been pulled off course? How gently could he return without shame? That was his progress. That was his power. He no longer needed to escape discomfort. He could sit with it, talk to it, learn from it. He had made friends with stillness. You don't detox to escape the world. You detox to enter it fully, unclouded, undistracted, unafraid. What might open up for you if you could finally hear yourself think? Over time, the detox became less of a challenge and more of a rhythm. Like the changing of seasons, it no longer required effort. It became part of him. He no longer feared silence. He sought it. He no longer resisted stillness. He craved it. He stopped needing to be filled. He became whole. And that's the part no one tells you about discipline. It eventually becomes devotion, not to some ideal of perfection, but to something sacred within you, a temple of clarity that only you can protect. His mind was no longer a battlefield of craving and reaction. It was a field of awareness. His thoughts moved slower now, not sluggish, but deliberate. Like monks walking barefoot through snow, each step meaningful, and that changed everything. He didn't need external validation anymore. He didn't crave recognition or applause or proof of worth, because when you return to your true self, clean, clear, and conscious, you realize nothing was ever missing. You were simply distracted from it. What if everything you were chasing was waiting in the place you were avoiding, within the quiet, the discomfort, the stillness? Could it be that your soul was never gone, just drowned in noise? He still lived in the same world, still worked a job, still paid bills, still walked past glowing screens and loud headlines. But now he passed them like a man walking through a storm with a lantern in his hand, aware of the wind but not governed by it. He was no longer plugged into the chaos. He had become an observer, and that was the greatest freedom of all, not escaping life, but walking through it untouched by its madness. To feel without being ruled by feelings, to think without being hijacked by thoughts, to act without reacting, to love without clinging, to serve without performing. And so he lived, not loudly, not for show, but deliberately. He became the kind of man who woke with the sunrise and whispered gratitude before his feet touched the ground. The kind of man who could sit on a park bench for an hour, watching leaves fall and call it a good day. The kind of man who taught others not by preaching, but by presence. He had detoxed not just from dopamine, but from illusion. What happens when a man no longer needs the world to be quiet, because he has found quiet inside himself? Can you imagine that kind of strength, that kind of freedom? In the end, he didn't measure his life by how much he consumed, but by how much he noticed, how deeply he loved, how fully he was there for the people he loved, for the moments that mattered, for himself. And when he looked back years later, he realized something almost too quiet to notice. He had reclaimed his mind, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his life. You don't need to run from the world. Just don't let it run you. Take back your attention, take back your stillness, and in that quiet space, become the man you were meant to be. The world will still shout, the noise will still knock at your door, but now you know, you have a choice, a daily choice, a stoic choice. Start with one breath before reaching for your phone. One cold morning walk without music. One journal page instead of a scroll. You don't need to fix everything today, but you do need to begin, because the real detox isn't about dopamine, it's about returning to yourself. If that journey speaks to you, stay with it, and come back here whenever the noise gets too loud.